Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Deku remastered Thor's power and became the god of thunder. Here is short summary. All Might may have told Midoriya that he was unworthy to become a hero, but he comes to learn he's worthy to become something so much more. A rewrite of a previous work. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Midoriya's heart jumped into his throat as he asked the question. Can someone like me? He shook, but suppressed the quivering in his fingers. This was his chance to ask his hero. Without a quirk, Midoriya pressed his eyes shut, unable to look at the symbol of peace. Be a hero. The whipped around him at the height of the building, and he felt his entire body quake. His heart was pounding in his ears, fear coursing through his veins. He wanted to ask All Might this for years. To get his perspective. All Might opened his mouth to speak. The scene ran through Midoriya Izuku's mind again and again as he ran through the city streets, burnt notebook in hand. He sniffed hard in an effort to stop the tears that were already flowing and allowed his legs to carry him through the streets until he didn't recognize where he was anymore. How long had he been running? What time was it? He didn't know, and he didn't really care. No, you can't be a hero. The words echoed in his head over and over. It was so final, so absolute. The name Deku seemed more fitting now than it ever had before. He really was a quirkless nobody, wasn't he? I guess when All Might tells you, that's really it, Midoriya choked, not watching where he was going. This is, of course, always a bad idea. He fell, his foot striking something, tripping and hitting the ground, which was at least a bit softer than he had been expecting it to be. He pushed himself up and wiped his eyes, looking around. He swore he was still in the city, but now he was surrounded by trees and grass. Civilization was nowhere to be seen. He turned and looked behind him, seeing a tree root that had erupted from the ground. That had been the culprit to trip him. Better a root than crashing into a tree. There's not a forest around here, is there? He asked no one in particular. He was met with silence at the inquiry, and Izuku could hear the faint rustling of forest animals all around him. Hello, he called into the woods. A few animals skittered and rustled the leaves around him, but there was no answer. He could hear the faint trickle of a stream from somewhere nearby, but couldn't pinpoint the location of the sound. However, in the distance, he could see a light from a clearing. Maybe that's where I came in from. Midoriya wandered through a thin, beaten path towards the light, a little embarrassed that he had allowed himself to lose track of time and even his location in his breakdown. But as he approached, he realized that this clearing wasn't civilization. No, he had come across a small pond of crystal clear water. In the middle of the pond, there was a rock of sorts jutting up from the water, perfectly centered and surrounded by the tall trees of the forest. There, sitting on the rock, was a large hammer of sorts. It was a simple hammer, a rectangular block of some sort of metal, the wooden handle pointing straight up into the sky. Midoriya looked into his reflection on the surface of the water, seeing his red, puffy eyes. He wiped them on his sleeve. Izuku. He jumped, looking around. Something had called to him, but no one was anywhere to be found. Hello, he repeated. Take the hammer, Izuku. Midoriya's eyes shot up to the hammer in the middle of the pond. I don't think I need a hammer. We have one at home. Take the hammer. The words made his heart flutter, for whatever reason. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to listen. This must be a dream. Logically, he should have turned and ran, or tried to wake himself up. Still, what was the harm in taking a hammer? He set his backpack down, and waded over to the water. The pond was only waist deep, and his clothes would dry. Midoriya Izuku climbed the rock in the pond's center with ease and looked down at the rather intimidating weapon. He grabbed the handle, expecting the hammer to feel heavy, but to his shock, he lifted it easily, holding it up to eye level with one hand. It felt well balanced in his hand, and he waved it around lightly. Is this a prop or something? He wondered, aloud. He ran a finger over the surface of the hammer, which confirmed that it was indeed a solid, metal hammer. Stranger still, It almost felt warm to the touch, despite being metal in the middle of the woods. Well, he called out to whatever voice had been speaking to him. I have the hammer. Now what? It was then that a bolt of lightning came crashing from the crystal clear blue sky and struck the young man dead in the chest. Dash dash. Am I dead? Midoriya half screamed in a panic, a reasonable response to being struck by lightning. He blinked a few times and gasped. No longer in the mysterious woods, Midoriya found himself in a mysterious hall that stretched taller than any building, stained glass windows all around him. The hall itself was empty, save for one man sitting on a throne at the back of it. The man was far different from any Midoriya had met before. He looked like something out of Viking folklore with a winged helmet, a braided beard, and long blonde hair that was beginning to turn gray. He had a metallic eye patch covering his right eye, and his face was rugged and scarred from many battles. He was looking out a nearby window, deep in thought, and hadn't seemed to notice Izuku's presence. Intimidating was the first word to come to mind, although he appeared to be asleep. Midoriya approached him cautiously, holding a hand out to wave. Hello, sir. I think I'm lost. Maybe dead. Do you know where I am? However, at Midoriya's appearance, the Viking snapped away and looked at the boy and gave a broad grin. Ah, there you are. I was waiting for you. Midoriya looked over his shoulders. No one else was here. The hall itself was about as big as a church, and just as echoey, so the absence of anyone else felt even more pronounced than usual. He pointed at his chest and asked, "Me?" The Viking bounded down the steps to meet Midoriya and gave a warm smile. "Of course you. You have Mjolnir, don't you?" "Mjolnir?" Midoriya asked, more confused by the minute. He held up the hammer. "You mean this?" The Viking examined the hammer. "That's Mjolnir, legendary weapon of Thor, the god of thunder." "But I'm not Thor, god of thunder." Midoriya furrowed his brow. "He disappeared after the Avengers all retired or died hundreds of years ago." "Well, obviously you aren't Thor Odinson," the Viking laughed. "I'm Thor Odinson. Pleased to meet you, Midoriya Izuku." He held out a hand, which Midoriya shook after a moment of hesitation. "I'm dreaming, aren't I?" "Not at all. See." Thor gripped Midoriya's hand tightly. "Ow." The teen yelped, retracting his hand and shaking it out. "There. Proof. Now, you're probably wondering why you found my hammer and ended up in the halls of Asgard." "Well, yes, but that at least answers where I am," Midoriya replied, rubbing his hand gingerly. He looked around. "This is some kind of prank, right?" Thor laughed and shook his head. "Oh boy. This is going to take a minute to explain. Why don't I just show you?" Thor raised his hand, and Mjolnir flew from Midoriya's hands into the Vikings. Thor pointed it at an open window, and suddenly the hammer began to glow blue and crackle with electricity. A bolt of lightning flew out of it and soared through an open window, creating a thunderclap that knocked Midoriya on his ass. "What?" Midoriya cried out. He sprung to his feet. "Holy crap, you really are Thor. I should have started with that. Yes, I am Thor. That is Mjolnir." And now, Thor handed the hammer back to Izuku. "Now you are the god of thunder, and Mjolnir is yours. You are also Thor. I mean, a Thor." Midoriya stared up at Thor, still in utter bafflement. A few seconds passed before, again, Midoriya uttered, "I'm sorry, what?" Thor chuckled again, running a hand through his hair. "I know this is a lot to take in. But I am aging, as you can see. Once upon a time, I used my strength to protect Midgard, Earth as you call it, Asgard, and the rest of the 9 realms. But years ago Valkyrie retired, and I find that ruling Asgard is getting harder to do, and I felt that it was time to pass the mantle on. And you chose me." Midoriya blinked in bewilderment. "No, I did not choose. Mjolnir chooses who is worthy to wield it. In the hands of anyone unworthy, it cannot be lifted or wielded. It's already begun to transform you into a worthy figure for the god of thunder. Look at yourself." Thor was right. Midoriya looked down at himself and really looked at himself for the first time. His clothes all felt immediately tighter. He was not a bodybuilder by any means, but muscles were now on his lean frame, and he felt noticeably stronger. "This can't be real," Midoriya reasoned. Most hero theorists just thought you were an alien or you had an advanced quirk for the time and thought you had delusions of being a god. There's no way. Wow, that's a rude thing to say to your mentor, Thor scoffed. I'm here saying I'm going to train you on being god of thunder and you call me delusional. You're lucky I'm used to this sort of disbelief. See for yourself. I do believe you're needed back on Midgard. I'll see you soon. Before Midoriya could respond, he felt himself be whisked away, his vision filled with all the colors of the rainbow. Suddenly he was thrown back onto the pavement, the sun beating down on him. He was back home, and it didn't seem like any time had passed. Next to him, Mjolnir sat next to his backpack. But he had no time to question this over the sounds of screaming and explosions. All thoughts were erased from his head as he recognized one of the screams. Kachan. Midoriya appeared outside the alleyway and was met with a scene of chaos. The sludge villain All Might had saved him from earlier was running rampant again, and a plethora of crows were all around, but none of them were advancing. Why? He squinted closer and saw. Bakugo was in the thralls of the sludge, the same way Izuku had been when he had been saved by All Might. How did he get? Midoriya began, but then it hit him. It was his fault. He had grabbed onto All Might, and he must have knocked the bottle loose. He slapped himself on the forehead. Of course I did. I have to do something. His legs moved without thinking for another time that day as Midoriya charged forward, but something else did too. He grabbed Mjolnir by its thick, leather strap, and spun the hammer around by his side. He could feel something welling up in his chest. Something in his chest was warm, surging through his veins. It made the hair on his head and arms stand up and charged the air around him. He could feel it. Midoriya grinned widely as pro-heroes shouted for him to get back. He couldn't hear them over the sound of lightning pulsating in his veins. This was a power unlike anything he'd ever felt before, and it was magnificent. The sludge monstrosity turned to look as he tried to suffocate Bakugo, and for a second his eyes widened in shock. You! Get off of him! Midoriya shouted, turning the hammer so that it was spinning in front of the villain. A pocket of concentrated air surged from Mjolnir, emulating the Texas smash he had seen from All Might earlier in the day. At the force, the villain was pried from Bakugo and the streets, splattering against the side of a building with squelch. You little brat! The villain cried, peeling himself from the wall. Bakugo looked up at Midoriya in shock as the green-haired boy lifted his hammer to the sky. From the pouring rain clouds, a bolt of lightning came, as if it was called by Midoriya, and struck Mjolnir. Izuku roared, pointing the hammer towards the sludge villain, and blasted him with a bolt of lightning that blinded the entire street. All that could be heard was the sound of his screaming. When the crowds and crows regained their sight, the sludge villain was splattered against the ground, unconscious and smoldering. Midoriya himself was nowhere to be seen. Gah! Next time give me a warning, Midoriya cried, collapsing in the halls of Asgard, at the foot of Thor's throne. The Asgardian roared with laughter. Well, I wanted to get you out of there before anyone had any questions. So, how was your taste of being the god of thunder? Another classic Thor adventure, right? Izuku caught his breath and stood up, dusting himself off. He stared at Thor, and the only question he could think of now was, why? Why what? Thor asked. Why did I send you to do that? He shook his head. Why am I worthy? He looked down at the hammer in his hands. Worthy. But, I'm a quirkless nobody. Thor grabbed his shoulders, making Izuku jump. Exactly. Come, sit down. To Midoriya's surprise, Thor sat down on the steps leading up to his throne and beckoned for Midoriya to join him. He complied, still wondering if this was some sort of dying dream as he choked to death on sludge. Maybe All Might never saved me. Maybe this is just my brain coping with death. Back when I would adventure on Midgard, Thor explained, there were not many superpowers. Or quirks, as you call them now. Some of the people who did have these abilities, we rallied together to protect Midgard from those who sought to destroy it. Those were the Avengers, like you said. Midoriya nodded, feeling somewhat numb from the day he had. Right, the oldest recorded hero team in heroics history. Thor puffed out his chest. The very same. Not to brag, but I was definitely the strongest Avenger. What are you doing? Thor looked at the boy in confusion as the teen dug a small notebook out of one of his pockets. We learned about you guys in quirk history. I even wrote a research paper about whether or not your ability to control lightning was proof of you as an alien or an early quirk emergence. I have so many questions. What is your hammer made of? Do you generate the lightning, or command it from the sky? Like is it inside of you? Alien, Thor scoffed. I'm Asgardian. Slow down. What differentiates Asgardians from humans? How long is your lifespan? Does that mean Loki is still around? You're just like Banner, Thor groaned, clasping a hand over Izuku's mouth. Stop nerding out on me. Besides, you wrote the paper. You probably came to some pretty good conclusions. Midoriya thought back to his own opinion on the paper, that the mighty Thor was just an early emergence of quirks who let power go to his head, and called himself a god. He decided not to disclose that. But, according to our classes, Hulk was. Midoriya began. The Hulk was what? Thor asked, huffily. The Hulk was of the strongest Avengers. Never mind, Izuku replied, scratching the back of his neck. Sorry, we were supposed to talk about why I'm worthy. That's what I had been talking about before you went into science mode, Thor laughed. Anyway, back then, there weren't many who had the power to stop evil. And now you live in a time where almost everyone has the ability. And the people who are the most able only seem to care about it doing so for coin or fame. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with the glory of battle and the spoils of a fight. But you, Thor grinned, you're the one of the only Midgardian whose entire drive revolves around saving others. Midoriya looked down at his own plans, setting Mjolnir down on the step below him. So you think I'm worthy of being a hero? Because I want to save others? Thor shook his head. Not just me, Midoriya. Mjolnir deems whether or not you were worthy. I thought you were worthy, so I put it there. Sure, but you're the one who proved it. Mjolnir thinks I'm worthy, Midoriya sniffed, and then, a tear leaked out of his eye followed by many more. Before he knew it, he grabbed Thor in a hug and bawled. Thank you, Thor. Whoa, hey, stop. You're getting me all wet. Thor gently pushed the smaller boy aside. You're more emotional than that old man of spiders. Anyway, don't thank me yet. We'll need to train you. Train me? Izuku asked, rubbing his eyes. Won't I get trained at hero school? With your powers, I could get into UA easily and... Thor laughed heartily and clapped Midoriya on the back. What, you swing the hammer around twice and think you can get into some sort of hero school? Don't be daft, you're still an amateur. You, young Midoriya, are going to learn to fight like an Asgardian god of thunder, because starting today, that's who you're going to be. I'll see you tomorrow, young Midoriya. I'll send the Bifrost for you after your classes. Oh, and leave the hammer at home for now. Before Midoriya could ask anything else, Thor clapped again, summoning the Bifrost to take Midoriya home. Before he knew it, he was outside of his apartment building, Mjolnir in hand. Izuku stared up at his building, then back down at his hammer, and then back up again, trying to process the events of the last hour. 1 hour, 60 minutes, and he had gone from Midoriya, quirkless loser who should kill himself, to Midoriya, god of thunder. I've got to be dreaming, Midoriya muttered to himself. Oi, there you are, you shitty Deku. Or maybe this is a nightmare, Midoriya groaned, inwardly. He turned around to see Bakugo Katsuki marching up to him, a scowl across his face. Or, as Izuku liked to call it, his default face. Bakugo stopped in front of Midoriya and paused, looking at the hammer hanging limply at the shorter boy's side. But he shook that off and launched into an angry tirade. I don't know how you managed to vanish after all that bullshit, but I didn't need you to save me today. Okay, Kachan, I believe you, Midoriya replied, rubbing the back of his head. Of course you didn't, sure. Just stay out of my way. Katsuki screamed. You're still a shitty useless nerd, even if you found some stupid support crap. Give me that. Kachan. Wait, Izuku yelled, but it was too late. Bakugo had grabbed for Mjolnir, and pulled it from Midoriya's hands. But something weird happened. The second Midoriya let go, Bakugo lurched forward as the hammer fell to the ground with a massive crash. Ah! Bakugo grunted, pulling on the handle. Hey, how did you make this so heavy? Midoriya blinked, realizing that this happened just the same way Thor had described it would. Bakugo was not worthy to wield Mjolnir. Something in Midoriya's brain clicked. He was worthy. Bakugo wasn't. Midoriya grinned as Bakugo grunted and bent down, grabbing at the hammer with both hands and tugged. Mjolnir, however, did not budge. Kachan, let me see, Izuku began, but he was met with an explosion to his chest, which knocked him back a few feet on his ass. Bakugo stood up and scowled. If a weak little shit like you can lift this, I should be able to. Bakugo squatted down and tugged on Mjolnir once more, to no avail. Izuku stood up, and scowled at the pain from the blast. Watching Bakugo struggle with the weapon, when usually everything came so easily to him, made Midoriya chuckle. Slowly, he reached a hand toward Mjolnir. But when he opened his palm, another curious thing happened. Mjolnir lifted from the ground, flipped over and flew straight into Izuku's hand in a second flat. Even better, when it flipped upright, it bonked Bakugo right in the nose, and sent him back onto his ass. Izuku wrapped his fingers around Mjolnir's handle and grinned. Ow! Bakugo cried, clutching his nose with both hands. A small trickle of blood seeped out. What did you do to my Notha? Midoriya smiled down at his hammer, and gave it a light toss into the air, flipping it once and catching it by the handle again. It's my hammer, Kachan. He turned, giving his childhood friend a small wave. See you tomorrow. Inko frowned at her son. Had her afternoon tea expired? Perhaps this was a fever dream. Can you run this by me again, son? Izuku frowned back. He'd tried to explain this to his mother as simply as possible, but he couldn't really blame her. Would anyone believe the type of day he'd had? Maybe I should just show you. He set Mjolnir down in the kitchen next to her. Try and lift this, he advised, taking a step back. Inko raised an eyebrow at her son and frowned. I mean, okay, son. She reached down with one hand and gave a tug, the hammer not moving an inch. She reached with both hands, still failing to get even a shudder from the weapon. My goodness, that's heavy. How'd you carry that back here? She backed up and tried to use her quirk on it, but it was too large to attract. That's part of what I've been trying to explain, Mom, he sighed. Now stand back, okay. I want to show you part of this new quirk, I guess. Inko took a few more steps back. Izuku held out his hand and Mjolnir lifted from the ground and flew to his grasp in an instant. She gasped at the speed of which the heavy weapon snapped into his hand. Oh, so your quirk works like mine on that hammer. No, Mom, I can only do that for the hammer because it's part of the God of Thunder. You're missing the part where I met Thor. Izuku groaned. Look, watch. He spun the hammer around a few times in his right hand, trying to emulate what he had done earlier in the day. It was a little harder without the adrenaline of a villain attack, but he managed to generate a small bit of electricity in his left. A tiny crackle of lighting danced around his left fingers. See, God of Thunder. And look, he rolled up his sleeves, showing the new muscles that had formed. I swear I haven't been working out. Inko frowned, and Izuku grimaced at the look on his mother's face. Mainly because he recognized it. It was a look she always gave him when he talked about wanting to be a hero, in spite of his quirklessness. A look of pity and sympathy met him, of which he wanted neither. Honey, I know the business with Katsuki today was scary, maybe you were just confused by something. Thor has been dead for centuries. Your new quirk is very neat, but we should go see a doctor to talk about it. I can make an appointment tomorrow. Izuku felt his chest deflate. Deep down, he knew that in his mother's shoes, he probably wouldn't have believed him either. Still, she was denying what was right in front of her, at least partially. Yeah, sure thing, Mom. He shuffled off to his room, content to at least try and see what sort of information he could dig up about Norse mythology and Mjolnir on his own. Midoriya Izuku had never been popular at his middle school, though he was used to people talking about him in some way or another. The words, nerd, fanboy, otaku, and quirkless, followed him around like his shadow, with no way to get rid of them. Bakugo and his friends usually made sure of that, as anyone who said differently found themselves under scrutiny. But all sorts of whispers seemed to be at Midoriya's back today. From the second he entered Aldera Middle School, he could feel eyes boring into his back and a murmur that followed him everywhere in different voices, but the same questions. Was that him on the news? Couldn't be. Where do you think he kept the hammer all this time? Think he's been lying this whole time? Ew. Why pretend to be Quirkles though? But when he turned around to see who was talking about him, they all turned away. Are they embarrassed? Or scared? The thought made him squirm. He didn't want people to be scared of him. He wanted to be the kind of hero who saved people with a smile. Just like All Might, he muttered to himself as he sat down at the cafeteria with his lunch. I haven't even thought about All Might since running into him yesterday, Midoriya thought to himself. He crushed my dreams just like Kacchan and everyone else. Midoriya reached into his backpack, sitting beside him at the lunch bench, and pulled out one of his old notebooks. He didn't write much about older heroes and quirks, if only because they weren't around much anymore to write about. But he had looked into the Avengers before. Who hadn't? He flipped to Thor's page, and compared it to the things he'd looked up the night before. Thor was one of the strongest Avengers and heroes of Earth during the early Quirks and Heroics era, he muttered to himself, adding a few notes in his margins. Thought by many to be just a very strong man with delusions of godhood, he called himself the Norse god of thunder, the same Viking god. Midoriya paused and added a note, and he actually is, turns out. Anyway, he was very popular for the time, if not always knowledgeable on Earth customs and practices. After a few years, he became known as one of the more jovial Avengers, despite his raw power and love of battle. After the deaths and disappearances of many of the original Avengers, Thor himself disappeared, seemingly without a trace. Many who believed his claims of godhood believed he returned to Asgard to rebuild it. That was about as much as he found about the man himself, and Midoriya had to wonder what he'd learn about Thor later that day. That was Asgard I was in, right? What happened to him? He hasn't been seen on Earth for hundreds of years, and we haven't had a god of thunder since. Why me? Why now? Excuse me, BWHA. I mean, yes. Midoriya replied, jumping. He had reason to jump, of course. No one ever stopped and talked to him. But now, a girl a grade younger than him was standing across from him at the table. Can I help you? That was you on the news, right? The girl asked, sheepishly. She held up her phone and played a video clip. Midoriya fought back a groan. There was, apparently, a very clear clip of himself running towards the sludge villain to save Bakugo. Full freckled face and green hair, it was unmistakably him wielding Mjolnir and approaching the sludge-covered maniac. Maybe. Midoriya shrugged. I can't. I'm gonna go. Shoving the rest of his rice ball into his mouth, he grabbed his notebook and backpack and quickly made for the exit, unaware of the girl watching him leave intently. She wasn't the only one. Bakugo and his lackeys had been watching him all throughout lunch as well. Considering the reception he'd gotten throughout the day, Midoriya was definitely ready for the day to be over. The sunshine felt good on his face and he paused for a second. Thor was going to send a bike frost for him. I guess that's how I got to Asgard in the first place yesterday, right? The clear skies cast a little doubt in his heart. Still, he figured he may as well walk home, and if he was getting summoned, it'd happen whether he liked it or not. Oi, shitty Deku. Midoriya grimaced and turned around, seeing Bakugo flanked by the two lackeys. He always had two lackeys. They were hardly ever the same two though. Why yes, Kacchan. Where's that shitty hammer? Bakugo grunted. A nerd like you shouldn't be carrying around support gear. Without thinking about it, he immediately replied, it's not support gear. At his words, the sky darkened as a few clouds rolled over the sunlight, casting a shadow across the schoolyard. Bakugo rolled up his sleeves and let his palms crackle threateningly. Oh, what was that? He grit his teeth. I know the nerd doesn't think he suddenly developed a quirk. Izuku could feel his pulse quicken in frustration. First his mom, then Bakugo, who had literally seen him defeat the sludge villain not 24 hours earlier. What's it to you? He blurted out, "Just leave me alone." Bakugo stepped forward and grabbed Midoriya by the collar, the same way he had before telling the shorter of the two to take a swan dive off the roof. But with faster reflexes than normal, Midoriya popped his arms from inside Bakugo's to break the blonde's grip, and shoved him back. The two glared at each other, but nothing further could occur as a thunderclap broke in the air, and a bolt of lightning screeched from the heavens to strike Midoriya in the chest in a burst of rainbow-colored light. Bakugo and his lackeys all fell backwards in shock as Midoriya was gone. "Oh, I'm back here," Midoriya half-screamed as he landed in the Hall of Asgard once more. "Midoriya, my boy," he jumped as Thor clapped him on the shoulder. "There you are. I didn't pull you from your classes too early, had I?" Midoriya turned and got another good look at Thor. He was just as he remembered him from yesterday. Tall, broad shoulders, with wispy hair that had signs of aging. The lopsided grin on his face didn't fit any sort of godhood, seeming incredibly good-natured. Izuku shook his head. "Nope, class just got out." Good, Thor nodded, leading the boy towards the throne. "Now, I see you already figured out how to summon Mjolnir to your hand when dealing with your mother and Kachao." Midoriya practically tripped over the air and did a double take. Kachao. The blonde bully at your school, Thor scowled. "Truly a reprehensible wretch. Anyway, that saves us lesson 1. Why don't you summon Mjolnir now?" The two stopped in front of the throne of Asgard and Midoriya nodded, looking around. "But aren't we a galaxy away? Or at least a lot of planets? I don't know the distance between Earth and here. Can it travel that far?" Thor gave another lopsided grin. "Well, you tell me, God of Thunder. Try it out." Midoriya turned, unsure of whether it was worth it to correct Thor about Bakugo's name, and looked to an open window. He raised his hand to summon Mjolnir, the same way he had with his mother and Bakugo the day before. He could feel a tingle of something in his hand and hear a faint rushing noise. It only took a few seconds for Mjolnir to zoom through the window and fly into his outstretched palm. He felt a warm buzzing shoot through his arm, having been separated from the weapon all day. "Oh wow," he gasped, "so you really can summon this from anywhere?" "Well sure," Thor chuckled. "I can. But you can too." "Right," Izuku winced. "Sorry, still wrapping my head around this whole I'm the God of Thunder thing. It's a big change, to be sure," Thor nodded. "Come, there's someone I want you to meet." Midoriya followed behind Thor, wondering where to start on his questions. Possibly not the best place to start, he asked, "Where have you been for these last 300 years? Thor hummed, looking at the boy. "I'm surprised you'd ask about me, Midoriya. Well, you were one of Earth's mightiest heroes. There are death records for many of them. Iron Man, Captain America, Spider-Man, Scarlet Witch, but you just vanished," Midoriya replied. "There were a lot of old conspiracy websites about what happened to you." Midoriya paused, seeing a rather crestfallen look on Thor's face as the two passed through an entrance hall. They had gone down a few flights of stairs at this point. "Ah, those are names I haven't heard in quite some time. Yes, after losing so many allies, I left Midgard. And well, what happened to me, I will detail to you later. It's a long story, truth be told. But some odd years ago, I returned to Asgard, and decided it was time for me to rule rather than play hero. That's when I sent Mjolnir to Midgard to find a successor." As they opened the doors to a courtyard, a husky, female voice interjected, "And about when he kicked me off the throne." Midoriya turned, and with a yelp, just barely ducked out of the way of a spear that was chucked at his head. A taller woman with darker skin was standing in a training circle in the middle of the courtyard. Thor let out some booming laughter as he pulled the spear from the ground. Valkyrie, and you seemed glad that I did, if I recall correctly. Come, Midoriya, meet my second-in-command and fiercest warrior." Placing his free hand over his heart to steady his heartbeat, Midoriya followed Thor to the middle of the courtyard. Valkyrie looked down at him and gave him a look over with a scrutinizing gaze. "This is the whelp chosen by Mjolnir." Thor's look became more stern. And he wielded it instinctually against a villain quadruple his size. He was granted some muscle mass by Mjolnir, but his form is unskilled. He looked to Midoriya. Valkyrie shall be training you in combat, and in a few days, I shall train you in the art of adventure itself." Midoriya raised both eyebrows and looked at Valkyrie with a gulp. "Ah. Oh. Okay. Should I change into my gym clothes?" He held up his arms. "I don't think the school wants spears ruining my uniform." Thor and Valkyrie both laughed. "Nonsense." Thor shook his head. "We'll get you suited up for battle. Come, young Midoriya." Midoriya followed after them, back into the Hall of Asgard, still unsure if all of this was real. He hoped it was. "There's no way this is real." Midoriya shook his head, looking down at his new training gear, as it had been coined. There were a pair of form-fitting black pants made of durable material and, if Thor was to be believed, enchanted to be even more so. His upper half was covered in scaled armor stretched down to his wrists, and his torso was covered by black breastplate. What was incredible was, despite the fact the armor looked heavy, it was incredibly lightweight. "That's made of mithril, hence why it's so durable despite its lightweight," Thor explained. "To my knowledge, the material is unobtainable on Midgard." He held up a red cape. "You sure I can't convince you to wear the cape?" Midoriya shook his head. "No capes. They tend to just lead to trouble." "All right, come then, young Midoriya." Thor grabbed a sword off the armory wall. "Two arms. Valkyrie waits for us." The blonde god rushed out, leaving Midoriya to look down at Mjolnir hesitantly. It still didn't feel real. Midoriya Izuku was thrown on his back violently, and a spear was shoved mere centimeters away from his throat. He let out a wheeze as the air was driven from his body. "That sucked," he beeped out. Valkyrie let out a hearty laugh. "Nonsense. That was far better than last week. You almost got me a few times." She reached her hand down, which Midoriya gladly accepted, and hoisted him to his feet. "Your form is a little better. But you need to try to not focus solely on the hammer. Your whole body is a weapon." "I guess that makes sense," Midoriya sighed. "You use all these weapons and end up kicking the crap out of me half the time." This drew another laugh from Valkyrie. "Observant. Which is good, and bad. You take too much time analyzing your fights. There are times when this is a good thing, but in the throes of battle, you have to go with your gut. Your battle instinct." I don't know if I have one," Midoriya asked. Thor, who had been watching from outside the ring, scoffed. "Nonsense. You acted without hesitation to save Kachao. You just have trouble when there aren't real stakes. Perhaps this would be a good time for our first journey into mystery." Valkyrie quirked an eyebrow at her friend. "Are you sure he's ready?" "Against what I have planned." "Surely," Thor nodded. "I will be with the boy as well, in case things go wrong. Come, Midoriya." Midoriya picked Mjolnir off the ground and followed after Thor, through the entrance hall and out into the whole of Asgard. Having come around for a week now, he was still getting strange looks from the Asgardians, but people began to heartily greet him along with Thor. It was almost strange how similar the average Asgardian was to a Midgardian. If Valkyrie was to be believed, their cultures had integrated a lot due to Thor's influence. As they began to cross the fabled Rainbow Bridge, Midoriya asked, "So where are we going?" "Aye lad, we're off to recover a treasure that was stolen from me many moons ago," Thor advised. "A great beast awaits in another realm, and together, we shall reclaim my honor and war spoils." "Aye. Wait, like a monster?" Midoriya asked. "Monsters aren't real." Okay, my bad, monsters are real, just in other realms." Midoriya yelled, ducking behind a giant boulder with Thor. "Apology accepted," Thor chuckled, not at all concerned by the growing heat just on the other side of the rock they were on. "But hey, on a scale of monsters, a skeletal dragon that breathes purple fire is pretty cool, right? Another classic Thor adventure." I guess. You've got the hero's instinct, Midoriya," Thor explained over the roar of purple flames that was licking the sides of the boulder. "It awakens when there's danger. Wait for an opening, and strike the beast down." Quote. Midoriya nodded, taking a deep breath, and waited for the flames to subside. He jumped out from behind the boulder, spinning Mjolnir by his side, and chucking the hammer towards the head of the undead dragon. The dragon ducked, and reared back for another blast of fire, and that was when Izuku called for Mjolnir to return. The hammer burst through the back of the skeletal beast's skull, and the rest of it collapsed onto the stony terrain, dead. Thor emerged as well, clapping heartily. Bravo! I like to call that the boomerang tactic, an excellent move against beasts and those unfamiliar with your skills. He walked right past the skeletal remains of the dragon and into the mouth of the cave. Now come, let us secure our spoils. Midoriya followed after his mentor, and asked, "What did that dragon steal from you anyway?" Thor. As he entered the cave, he had to squint at the reflection of hoarded gold and jewels in the mouth of the cavern. Holy crap, I guess all those myths about dragons were true. Even in death, this beast couldn't be persuaded to part with its hoard. Huzzah, my treasure! Thor's voice cried out, emerging from a pile of gold with a "That's a gold PlayStation controller?" Midoriya asked, bewildered. "That was the treasure." Thor beamed back at the boy. This was my best one. It brings me luck when I smite others. Now come, let us line our pockets with gold." Midoriya watched as the king of Asgard turned and began cramming gold and jewels into his trousers. Thor is a bit goofier than I was expecting, sometimes. Still, he shrugged and began pocketing as much gold as he could carry. It'd be nice to help his mom out with a few things. As spring gave way to summer, and summer gave into autumn, Midoriya explained to Thor that he would have to register and try out for UA's hero course one evening before being sent back to Earth. Yes, I think you'll be prepared. Thor agreed. Still, hundreds of years later, and Midgard still requires licensing for heroes. You think they'd have learned? Yeah, I remember reading that there was a lot of struggle about the Sokovia Accords and them getting repealed. What side were you on? Midoriya asked, curiously. PFF'd. I was off planet. Thor waved a hand. I had better things to do while Tony and Steve threw tantrums. Hard to think of a time where heroics weren't integrated into the public systems like that. Midoriya rubbed his chin. But about that, I have to register with a quirk, and your power isn't exactly a quirk. Would I call it weather manipulation? Electrical manipulation? That doesn't explain Mjolnir though. Thor furrowed his brow, already feeling a full-blown mumbling session coming from Midoriya. Midoriya, there are records of my feats on Midgard. Call your power God of Thunder. This is nothing you need to hide to try and conform to a box. Anyone is free to sign up, correct? Well, yeah, you have to sign up and pass the examination, Midoriya confirmed. I'm just worried they'll see it and not believe me. It took you 2 weeks to believe you had this power, Thor quipped, dryly. If they don't believe it, just show them. He added a pat to Midoriya's shoulder. You've mastered so much, save for flight and full weather manipulation around you. Have faith in yourself, Midoriya. You're right. Midoriya nodded. I'm signing up tonight then. When are we going to work on weather manipulation? Tomorrow, Thor smiled, and it will be the brunt of our week, I expect. Changing the weather is one thing, but maintaining control is a whole beast. And I want you to know, I am exceptionally proud of how well your training has gone. Izuku could feel his face heat up into a blush. Thanks Thor. That really means a lot to me. I wish my mom could hear you say that. She still thinks I'm just running off to the gym or something every day. Thor's face fell into one of shock. Wait, she still doesn't believe you. Even with all the abilities you can use with Mjolnir. Well, I can't show her much in the apartment, Thor, I'd wreck it. Point taken, Thor grunted. I'll think of a way to rectify this. Good night, Midoriya. With a wave of his hand, the Bifrost took Izuku away, leaving Thor to ponder. From the entrance to the courtyard, Valkyrie leaned in the doorframe. You sure have taken a soft spot for the boy, haven't you? And what's wrong with that? Thor shrugged to his longtime friend. I've no natural heir, and the lad is to succeed me in Asgard. Fair enough. He's a likable lad, and quick to learn, Valkyrie relented. Still, you know what this means for you. Eventually Midgard will find out you're still around. Let them. Thor scoffed. How they handle that news is on them. Midgards are always quick to dismiss the supernatural and forget it ever happened. I just hope it doesn't cause Midoriya any trouble, that's all. Valkyrie added, straightening herself out from the doorway. Someone always wants to take advantage of power. Or it puts a target on their back. The next day, Midoriya left Aldera in a good mood, which had been happening surprisingly more often as of late. It helped he wasn't suffering all the quirkless insults anymore, and he had a lot more to look forward to. He'd officially registered for the UA entrance exam, and with that only a few months away, things were looking up. At least, he thought that way before an explosion rocked his upper shoulders, sending him a few feet forward, sprawled against the pavement. Gah! He was given no chance to recover either, as two bodies quickly pinned down his arms and grabbed at his hands. As his vision and hearing returned, he realized those two bodies belonged to two of Bakugo's lackeys, holding down his arms and forcibly trying to close his fists so that he couldn't summon Mjolnir. Katsuki himself stood above him, looking down at him with a look of disdain and malice. "TCH, he grunted. "That's what I thought. Without that hammer, you're still a shitty Deku, aren't you?" At the words, Midoriya struggled, trying to pry his hands open or throw Bakugo's lackeys off of him. But even with the increased muscle mass he had gained under Thor's tutelage, he couldn't force the two teen boys off his arms when they were spread out like that. He just didn't have the leverage. "Tell Itchy and Scratchy here to get off of me," he growled. "I'm not a Deku anymore. If you have a problem with me, say it to my face." Bakugo turned and looked at Midoriya as he lay on the school walkway a few feet away. Looking up, he saw a crowd was drawing around them. A smile snuck across his face, the kind of smile reserved for when he was showing how strong he was. What was the point of being the strongest without an audience, after all? He looked back down to Izuku. "Fine Deku, you think you're strong enough to get into UA, just because you put on some muscle and found a support item I haven't figured out." "Get him, Bakugo," sneered one of his underlings. Bakugo bent forward, placed a hand on Midoriya's chest and let loose an explosion, sending ash and smoke up Izuku's nose as he struggled and yelled in pain. But, despite it hurting like hell, like an explosion would to anyone, it wasn't nearly as bad as he remembered. The pain gave way to frustration and anger, and Midoriya began to thrash against his captors. "Get off!" Bakugo seethed in anger that his victim was still fighting back. "Just stay down," he barked, unaware of the blue sparks and crackles that were emanating from Midoriya. The lackey on Midoriya's right arm noticed it though. Bakugo. Shut up," Katsuki barked, before attacking again. Two more explosions rocked the ground, causing the pavement to shake and rubble to smack against Midoriya's forehead. The pain mixed with frustration, and the green-haired boy could feel his heart pounding furiously in chest. It almost sounded like a rumble as the blood rushed to his ears. "Know your place, nerd." He could hear Bakugo yelling over the ringing in his ears. Bakugo stood up and gloated to the crowd of students who had gathered around. The pain and laughter from Bakugo's words mixed with the anger Midoriya was already feeling. He heard thunder in his ears, and the beating of his heart on adrenaline sent a feeling of pinpricks along his entire body. His arms felt like they were on fire, and for a minute he saw a look of worry cross the face of one of the boys holding him down. Hey Bakugo," the friend called. "Shut up," Bakugo sneered. "I'm busy." It was unfortunate that he chose not to look back. If he had, Bakugo might have noticed that Midoriya himself was changing. The boy's normal green eyes were now glowing blue, and his hair was standing on end. Midoriya wasn't sure why these particular words came to mind, perhaps because Thor talked about having said them so much in his early days. But as Bakugo raised his hands to show off another explosion to the class, Izuku opened his mouth. The shout that came out shook the entire school. "I say thee nay." At the words, clouds formed in the sky, covering the schoolyard in darkness. Lightning cracked, thunder roared, and the heavens opened up to pour rain down upon the entire middle school. Bakugo tried to form an explosion, but the heavy rain completely put out any flames he tried to ignite. With a surge of strength, Midoriya turned, throwing the two boys off of him, sending the two lackeys flying into the air. He stood to face Bakugo, drawing gasps from the students of Aldera Middle School as electricity crackled all around him. The two once friends glared at each other with gritted teeth. Midoriya marched forward, seething with anger, eyes ablaze in an icy blue color. "Bakugo, to his credit, matched the steps of his counterpart, until they were only a foot or so apart, glaring at each other. Midoriya raised his hand so that it was level with Bakugo's head, a few inches to the right of his shoulders. Within an instant, Mjolnir flew to Izuku's hand, the weight of the hammer on the same level as Bakugo's head. It was only for a brief instant, but Izuku could tell the message was received loud and clear. In that moment, Bakugo flinched, his anger falling and giving way to a look Midoriya had never seen on the taller boy's face before. It was fear. "Don't you ever," Midoriya growled, a voice far more booming than it naturally had any right to be, "ever touch me again." Lightning began to light up the sky around them as the winds whipped up. The rain turned to a downpour, and many students began to flee in terror as thunder seemed to shake Aldera itself. Neither Midoriya or Bakugo moved from their stalemate as the weather continued to worsen. The situation could have turned very dangerous. It could have turned into a bloody fight. But it was at that moment, Thor sent the Bifrost to summon Izuku to Asgard, leaving alone Bakugo to fume and stir in his embarrassment. "That son of a bitch!" Bakugo kicked the ground in frustration, drawing laughs from the students who were still gathered around. It took Midoriya a moment or two to calm down once in the throne room of Asgard, and when he did, he saw Thor looking at him with a smile that wasn't full of its usual vigor for battle. "So, you summoned the storm," Thor mused, voice quieter than usual. "And without Mjolnir or any training. That's truly an impressive feat for someone so inexperienced." Midoriya began to panic, immediately sensing some disappointment in Thor's voice. I'm sorry, Thor. I didn't mean to. Thor grabbed his shoulder gently. "Hey, you don't need to apologize. You were defending yourself. The problem was that you were about to turn that thunderstorm into a hurricane if that continued. That's why I pulled you out of there." Izuku blinked a few times, not realizing how bad things had gotten. It was getting pretty bad, huh? Crap. It could have hurt many people." Thor cut him off, gently. "It didn't. No one got hurt, it's fine. A small storm that will blow over soon is all that it will be, I saw to it. Look, let's go sit and talk for a bit, shall we?" The two turned and sat on the stairs below the throne. Thor looked down at his own hands for a moment. "I, too, first learned how to summon a storm in anger. I'm not surprised that it was in the same vein that you learned as well." There was something of a melancholy tone in his voice as he told the tale. "What do you mean?" Midoriya asked. "When I was a boy, my brother Loki." Thor glanced down to see Midoriya had already taken out his notebook at the mention of the god of mischief. "Put that way, we're not doing the nerd thing right now. Anyway, Loki and I didn't see eye to eye as children, brothers as we were. When we were teenagers, I was lured to the seaside far from home by the call of a siren." "Was that Loki?" Izuku asked. Thor nodded. "That time, yes. Usually a siren either meant a good fight or, well, ask your parents." "I'm 15, Thor. I know what gender is," Midoriya deadpanned, though his cheeks took a red tinge at the word. "Good. Saves me from a very awkward talk," Thor laughed. "Anyway, when I arrived, Loki arranged an avalanche near a cliff. Rocks pinned me underwater. That's kind of terrifying." Izuku gulped. "PFF, Thor waved dismissively. "That was one his tamer attempts to kill me, in the long run. Anyway, fearing for my life and enraged, I called forth a tsunami. Nearly killed Loki and myself." "I see." Thor nodded. "This Kachow child. You told me, briefly, that you two grew up together. Used to be friends, correct?" Izuku nodded back. "Yeah, we were. We were really good friends right up until he got a quirk and I didn't. Everyone was so blown away with how powerful he was. I'm not sure what happened, but at one point he just started acting like everyone was beneath him. Like he had something to prove. And we haven't really been friends since. When those broken bridges between us are severed, sometimes we seek closure and reconciliation. That's a sentiment in both Midgard and Asgard alike. Sometimes Loki and I could only get along after we had a chance to come to blows. Sometimes not. But ultimately, you might need to learn when to let someone go and realize the bridge is burnt," Thor advised. "Maybe you two shall make amends in time, but you don't need to nail your hand to the plank to do so." Midoriya stared out into the palace, thinking over Thor's words. I'm not sure these issues could ever be resolved. I think Bakugo could be a really good hero. But he's totally selfish. It's all about power and winning to him. Seeking power above all else tends to lead to ruin, Thor replied. But that's his own path to follow. You need not decide right now. But you may want to pull this weed out from the root. After a pause, Thor added in a dry tone, frankly, I think a fair number of your self-worth issues stem from his torment, and given the chance, I'd throttle the boy. This gave Midoriya a laugh. No one ever talked about Bakugo that way, and it was refreshing to have someone look out for him. Thanks, Thor. I'll keep that in mind. Good, Thor exclaimed, clapping his apprentice on the back. Enough lectures. Let us work on control of these abilities. Which means controlling your emotions as you use them. You have an exam coming up, the first step to being a great hero worthy of the title God of Thunder. As Thor turned away, Midoriya got up to follow and summoned Mjolnir to his hand. This power, amazing as it was, came with a heavy responsibility and a lot of risks. Summoning a storm was just something he'd learned not to have to take lightly, and only with a clear heart. Izuku, wake up, you have guests. Midoriya Izuku groaned as he woke up mid-morning on a Saturday afternoon. Who would be visiting him? While the bullying had stopped, no one at Aldera was anyone he would call a friend. Tiredly, he threw on some clothes and walked out to the living room, stopping in his tracks to see a man with black hair and in a suit sitting on the couch opposite his mother, and a strange, rodent bear creature sitting next to the man. Both were sipping tea that his mother had prepared. Izuku, Inko said, worryingly, these men are here to talk about your application for UA. His pulse skyrocketing and fingers feeling shaky, Midoriya turned to them. Why yes, sirs. Greetings, Midoriya Izuku. The rodent piped up in a cheerful tone, my name is Nedzu, and I am the principal at UA. This stern-looking gentleman with me is Aizawa Shota, one of the first-year homeroom teachers. Izuku bowed. It's an honor to meet you both. Oh, what wonderful manners, the principal chuckled. Now, we receive many applications to UA every year. And while everyone is free to sign up and try out, something was flagged in our system this year. Now, you seem to be a smart lad with good grades, any guess as to what that might be? Midoriya gulped. That my quirk was listed as God of Thunder. The slightest scoff came from the man called Aizawa, who Midoriya could swear he recognized, but he said nothing. Nedzu kept his jovial tone, though. Very good, perceptive one, aren't you? Now, we occasionally get someone trying to claim they are a descendant of an older hero to try and tilt favor, but I can't recall anyone claiming that they themselves were the second coming of Thor. However, when I looked into it, I found some very interesting news footage. Aizawa, on cue, held up a phone, which displayed Midoriya intervening in the sludge villain attack, creating both an air blast as well as a lightning strike. Inko, apparently, had never seen the footage and gasped in shock. Izuku. Mom, I tried to tell you. He reacted, confused. I showed you that video the same day. The video definitely lends some credence to your claims of succession. The reason I came was to discuss this possibility that you are the God of Thunder and this is the same power set. To verify, I suppose. Is it all right if we go to a private location to test this out? He held up his briefcase. And I'm aware how unnerving that sounds, so I brought all my credentials to prove I am who I say I am. Let me see them really quickly, Inko asked. Of course, Nedzu nodded, opening the case and handing a stack of papers to Inko. While we do that, Midoriya Izuku, could you show me if it's true that you can summon the weapon with just your hand? Sure, Midoriya stuttered, turning and opening his palm towards his bedroom. Mjolnir came around the corner and into his waiting hand a moment later. Oh, fascinating, Nedzu exclaimed enthusiastically as he handed a stack of papers to Inko. Is that telepathic, and does it only work with your hands? Why yes, just my hands, Midoriya nodded. And I don't know if it's telepathic, I sort of have to will it? If that makes sense, it only comes when I want it to. Interesting. Nedzu nodded. After a brief pause, he turned to Inko. Are you satisfied? Sure. She nodded, turning to her son. Are you okay with this? If it helps me get into UA, of course, he nodded. Gathering their shoes and belongings, they followed the principal and Mr. Aizawa out to the road, where a limo had been parked. It was a bit exciting, since neither of them had ever ridden in one before. And Midoriya nearly began shaking with excitement when they pulled up at the site where the entrance exam was going to be in a few weeks. Once parked, they followed the principal inside, to a gymnasium-like room. This isn't where the entrance exam will be for the heroic students, Nedzu forewarned. This is actually where support students put together things for their exam. But it will provide a private space. So, Midoriya, explain to me how you came to inherit the powers of Thor. Well, it's going to sound pretty unbelievable, Izuku warned, but I grew up quirkless. I've been quirkless right up until, well, almost a year ago now. When the thing with the sludge villain happened, I was He paused, and Nedzu noticed a very hesitant and pained expression in his eyes. The rodent made a mental note of this. Midoriya had gone through something that was very difficult and hard to discuss. It was a bad day, Midoriya muttered. He went on to explain he ran off, upset, and lost track of where he was. He didn't get into what had happened with All Might, but it was very clear to both teachers that he was omitting some information. He explained the strange wooded clearing he found, the hammer in the pond, hearing it call to him, meeting Thor, and the rest. He also explained how he had been training with Thor. When he was done, there was a pause in the gymnasium. Aizawa turned to Nedzu. So this is a waste of time, right? Powerful or not, the boy is clearly crazy. Midoriya's heart sank and panic set in very quickly. But before he could respond, a light flashed in the gymnasium, beckoning in another presence. I would choose your next words carefully before insulting my protege, lest you make yourself an enemy of Asgard. All eyes whipped around to see Thor himself, standing in his old hero suit. It was a bit snug in the midsection, but it was unmistakable. How did you get in here? Aizawa barked. This is a private, secure location. Oh my god, he's real, Inko muttered, backing up and feeling weak at the knees. Aizawa, in a swift motion, grabbed his scarf and flung it at Thor in a strange motion. Midoriya was awed at the speed of which the scarf turned into a restraining tool, that probably would have worked on any normal human. But as he pulled the scarf to try and snag Thor, there was no give at all. Thor didn't even budge. The scarf fell to the floor in a heap around the Viking. A restraining device? Thor asked, chuckling. You Midgardians have gotten very creative with your tools in the last few centuries. I bet this works well against anyone who is not the king of Asgard. Can I help you? Thor was sidetracked as Nedzu, who seemed the least nonplussed at the situation, had walked over and began to examine the Viking god. Oh my, was that the Bifrost you used to get here? I've read about the phenomenon extensively, but I never imagined I would get to see it in person. Thor looked up at Midoriya, confused, as the small dog here in charge. Not the tired scarf man. Izuku nodded. Nedzu seemed unfazed by the reaction. I didn't imagine that with our discussion, the genuine Thor himself would show up. How are you still alive? Do Asgardians have lengthened lifespans? Thor answered, a bit deflated that a mouse person had stolen the thunder of his dramatic entrance. Compared to a Midgardian, yes, our lifespans are incredibly long. We are then later reborn in a cycle called Ragnarok, though the passing of Odin has thrown things off considerably. Because of that, I needed an heir to the title of God of Thunder. So that is why Midoriya has been chosen as your successor. And did you choose, or was it all Mjolnir? And the forest clearing, that was a conjuring of the hammer? Nedzu asked. Thor laughed. Mjolnir chose, and the forest clearing was a conjuring of the hammer. He looked up at Izuku and pointed to the principal. I like this one, he gets it, I don't have to explain things to him. Thor and Nedzu talked a little bit more before the rodent shook his head. We are getting off task. Thor, is there a way I could communicate with you? I'd love to discuss Asgard and your exploits privately. But we are to focus on Midoriya's education. I have integrated email into Asgardian culture. And what did you want to ask of Midoriya? Well, now that I have confirmation of the nature of Midoriya's claims, I wanted to test a theory. Nezu answered. He walked to the center of the gym and set down a small box from his pocket. He hit the button on the side, and it expanded into a training dummy. I had Power Loader construct these portable training dummies with our support class. This should be electricity resistant and nigh indestructible. Midoriya, I want you to show me a few things. Just your lightning abilities, if nothing else. Aizawa, see if your quirk works on him. What quirk? Midoriya asked. Never mind that, Midoriya, just zap the dummy, please. As hard as you can. The teen paused. Are you sure? Of course. Midoriya looked at Thor, who just shrugged. Midoriya clutched Mjolnir in his hands, and immediately began focusing as much power as he could. A quick blast could be done almost instantly, but he spun Mjolnir at his side, which helped him focus and generate his power. After a second he pointed the hammer forward and let loose a lightning strike, far larger than the one he had used against the sludge villain. The testing dummy promptly exploded. Inko shrieked as it went up in smoke, but Nezu cheered, clapping his paws together. Oh marvelous, that certainly packs quite a punch. The principal turned to Aizawa. And Midoriya turned to Aizawa and noticed the teacher had been glaring at him with red, glowing eyes, which made his hair stand on end. The teacher relaxed and his hair fell. I was using erasure on him the whole time, Principal Nezu. It doesn't seem to have an effect on his abilities. Something clicked in Midoriya's mind. He recognized Aizawa. Wait a minute, you're Eraserhead, the underground hero. Your quirk disables other quirks when you're looking at them. Aizawa raised his eyebrows in surprise. You've heard of me. That's a bit off-putting. I try and keep my identity and abilities guarded. I'm a bit of a hero nerd, Midoriya admitted, blushing. Growing up quirkless really made me admire quirks and heroes. It's why I want to be a hero one day. Inko, who was just now recovering from shocking, nodded in agreement. He's been trying to emulate All Might since he was just a young thing. At the name, both Izuku and Thor frowned slightly, again only Nezu picked up on it. He changed the topic. Well, then that certainly confirms the hypothesis that Thor, and now Midoriya Izuku's abilities, fall outside of the realms of quirks. Quite fascinating. I'll be honest with you, Midoriya, I'd like to just offer you a spot in the school on my recommendation. You need not go through the testing. Both Midoriyas gasped. But isn't that unfair to everyone else? Izuku asked. I have to agree with him, Aizawa interjected. We're far past the recommendation stages. We can certainly admit Midoriya, but he has to take the test. Oh, deadlines and bureaucracy, always the death of me, Nezu groaned. Very well, it will mostly be for show, but you will take the test as scheduled. In the meantime, I think you should really think about whether you want to present yourself as the next coming of the God of Thunder. What do you mean? Midoriya asked. Being considered a god among Midgardians, they expected highly of me. Thor answered. A being they believed to be mythical was real and tangible. Much was expected of me, and my failures were held under heightened scrutiny. Almost as much as the man of spiders. He furrowed his brow. I'm not sure why the press hated him so much, to be honest. Anyway, much attention will be focused on you once it becomes widespread. Midoriya looked to his feet, turning the words over in his mind like a pebble. Well, that's fine with me. I always wanted to save people, and with a smile on my face. I want people to see me and feel reassured. I mean, that's how people felt when you showed up, right? The question took Thor by surprise. To be honest, it's been so long I practically forgot. Alright, well, then you have a lot to live up to, Nezu advised. He approached Midoriya and extended his paw. It will be a pleasure helping you reach that potential in our school. Provided things go well on the exam, he said with a wink. Midoriya shook the principal's hand. Thank you, Principal Nezu. 2 weeks came and went, practically flying by as Midoriya's excitement took hold of him. Midoriya stood outside the building for his examination, staring up at it as his feet drug underneath him. This was it. Despite all his training, he still couldn't quell the butterflies in his stomach as he approached. Not helping was the fact that he hadn't slept well at all the night before. He kept having the same dream all week, that he would wake up, and that Mjolnir was gone. In the dream he was no longer worthy, and he went back to being a quirkless nobody, a useless Deku. But that was not the case. Mjolnir was always there when he awoke, and he held it at his side as he walked to building he'd visited a few weeks ago. About the only thing he hadn't mastered was flight, which Thor had told him took a little time. Something about harnessing the wind energy within himself. I got this, I got this, I got this, he repeated in his mind. The mantra, ever present since he had left his home, was vaguely calming. That was, until he tripped over his own 2 clumsy feet. I don't got this. He braced himself for imminent death of pavement and embarrassment, but it never came. Suddenly, he halted at a 45-degree angle, something tugging around his midsection that held him in place. Huh. The tugging got stronger briefly, and pulled him back onto his feet. Looking down, Midoriya saw something long and pink unwrap from his midsection and retreat behind him. Following it, he saw it was in fact a tongue, and that was recoiled into a girl with long green hair, who was hunched over slightly. Even without the hunch, she was a bit shorter than him, and her hands and eyes seemed a bit larger than the average teenage girl's. The keyword here was, girl. Did a girl just touch me with her tongue? On instinctual reaction, Midoriya made some sort of odd sound between popcorn popping and a chipmunk squeaking, and covered his reddened face behind his arms. The girl tilted her head curiously at the reaction, poking an index finger to the corner of her mouth. Hero, sorry about using my tongue to stop you. I guess that's kind of gross since you're a stranger. Just thought it would be better than face planting. Realizing she was just trying to help, he cleared his throat to try and catch his composure. Thank you. Midoriya managed to bow slightly, returning his arms to his side. Even as he straightened out, he couldn't muster the courage to look her in the eyes. I guess with how nervous I am I tripped over nothing. Thankfully, the girl looked up at the building past him. You must be trying out for the hero course too, hero. Midoriya managed a small nod. Thankfully, the girl with large eyes noticed, preventing the need for him to speak further. I wonder what they'll have us do. I'm pretty nervous, hero, she said. Despite her claim, and Midoriya's nervousness, this took him aback a bit. Her voice was anything but nervous. It was a stoic, croaky voice. If anything, it took him out of his panicked stupor a bit. If she could be nervous and not be a stuttering mess, then Midoriya probably could manage the same. Me too, he admitted, the redness falling from his cheeks a bit. Thanks again. My name is Midoriya Izuku. He extended his free hand to shake hers. Nice to meet you. No problem, she riveted. Nice to meet you too. Good luck today, hero. And I'm Asui Suyu, hero. You can just call me Suyu, though. The two turned and began walking towards the building. Another croak came from the girl, and Midoriya was about to ask if it was part of her quirk, but she asked first, so what's with the hammer? Is it part of your quirk, hero? I thought we weren't allowed to bring weapons. Yeah, it's part of my abilities, Midoriya replied. UA knows it's part of my powers, I had to talk to them about it ahead of time. What's your quirk? It's called frog, she replied, sticking her tongue out about a foot over her head for show. She retracted and added, it's not just the tongue. I can go anything a frog can. To her great surprise, Midoriya met her with a lot of excitement. Whoa, like any frog. That sounds so cool. I mean, that would give you enhanced leg strength, the ability to cling to walls, the enhanced swimming. You must be really strong in the water. Can you make poisons too? I know not all frogs secrete poisons, but that would give you an edge in close-range combat, since the leg strength probably couldn't overcome a foe with enhanced endurance, so. He had devolved into a full fit of muttering, Midoriya. He snapped out of it and looked up. You were muttering about my quirk, hero, Asui said, a bit alarmed. It was a little creepy. Midoriya winced, feeling his face heat up. I'm sorry Asui, I grew up quirkless for a lot of my life, so I'm kind of a fanboy for unique quirks. Sorry. She tilted her head in surprise. Hero, it's okay. To be honest, I'm not used to people showing interest in my quirk. It's kind of weird. The big eyes and big hands kind of freak people out. I can secrete poison, but it's mostly harmless. It can cause skin irritation at best, if I want it to. Oh, and like I said, call me Suyu, not Asui. Sorry Asu. I mean, Suyu. Your quirk is really cool, Midoriya assured her, shaking his head. I bet you're going to ace this exam. And your eyes are really pretty, so it's weird for someone to call them weird. He hadn't really thought about what he said until Asui made a long croaking noise and blushed. She stuttered out, thanks, Midoriya. It hit him that he had complimented her eyes and he immediately turned red as well. I didn't. I mean, they are pretty, I just didn't. You're welcome Asu. Suyu. Cease this flirting before the exam immediately. Both the greenettes jumped and turned to see a tall, blue-haired boy with glasses marching up to them. This is the highest institute of heroic learning. He was waving his arms around, practically seething. And you're over here trying to distract this lady with your degenerate flirting. By now, everyone around was watching Midoriya get scolded. If his face wasn't red before, it certainly was now. That's not what I was trying to do. Before the blue-haired boy could keep going, the voice of Present Mike ushered them that the exam would begin soon. We should go, Midoriya said to them both, turning and running inside. Hero, all right, Asui muttered, walking after him. You will treat UA with the proper respect. Blue boy barked after him. What are you waiting for? Get going. Midoriya turned back from where Present Mike was standing to see the rest of the examinees were all taking off running to hunt down the robots. Damn it, he cursed under his breath, taking off running while spinning Mjolnir at this side. The written exam, while hard, he at least figured he passed. Most of the questions he felt confident about, but there were enough throwing him off that he still felt uneasy turning it in. Part of him still felt rattled at how he'd been scolded for flirting. He turned a corner that many others seemed to have ignored, and was immediately met with a 3-pointer and a 2-pointer coming down the alley towards him. Midoriya slammed Mjolnir to the ground, and lightning exploded from it, a bolt hitting both robots and reducing them to smoldering debris. 5 points. He charged down the path to see 2 1-point robots emerge from corners and begin firing lasers at him. He whipped Mjolnir at one and rolled to the side. With one smashed, he recalled Mjolnir after the roll and shot a bolt of lightning from the hammer before the second robot could fire again. 7 points. He emerged from the alley into a larger street, and looked around for more of an opportunity. Midoriya heard explosions and yelling coming from his left, and instinctively ran towards it. Momentarily, he forgot this was a test. It sounded like someone was in trouble. More voices became distinct. Apparently this was where all the robots were. Charging down the streets, he saw a blonde boy surrounded by 3-pointers, destroying them as he shot a laser out of his stomach. He seems to have this under control, Midoriya thought, but no sooner than this crossed his mind, the boy doubled over in pain, clutching his stomach. My tummy, he cried. As he crouched, 2 more robots loomed over him, ready to strike. Midoriya wasn't sure how vicious these robots were programmed to be against entrants, but he wasn't about to find out. Look out, Izuku cried, leaping over the boy and smashing a robot to pieces with a crack of Mjolnir. As he landed, he shot another bolt of lightning at the remaining 3-pointer, which promptly melted into a heap. 13 points. Hey, are you okay? He asked, turning to the blonde and extending a hand. Laser Stomach Boy took Midoriya's hand and stood up, still holding his midsection with his other arm, but smiled almost as brightly as his laser. Oui, mon ami, my hero, merci, my green-haired friend. The French-speaking took Midoriya by surprise a bit. Oh, no problem. Good luck out there. He peeled off, running down the street away from the boy, and he could hear the sounds of battle coming to his right. He looked down another alley to see a silver-haired girl surrounded by robots as well. They looked like 2 and 1-pointers, and the girl was swinging debris around her in the air, waving her hands around as she did. That must be a telekinesis-type quirk, he thought. From the amount of debris, She had taken out a fair number of them before one struck her in the back, knocking her down. Midoriya leapt into action. I say thee nay, robots. Jumping high into the air with enhanced Asgardian muscles, he spun Mjolnir at this side and shot multiple lightning bolts down, hitting all the robots surrounding the girl. Nice, that's like 9 more points. He landed in a circle of destruction, next to the girl who was covering her head defensively. Are you okay, miss? He asked, adrenaline almost helping him not to stutter. He reached a hand down to help her up. The girl looked up and Midoriya felt his heart skip a bit. Only one eye was peeking out from behind her silvery bangs, but it was an incredibly beautiful bluish-gray one that peered right into his soul. Her pouty lips gave him a faint smile, making his throat tighten. The girl stood up, taking his hand. Yes, thank you most sincerely for the assistance. His heart pounded in his ears, though the sound of screaming around him snapped him out of it. No problem. Let's keep it. The two split up, Midoriya trying to regain his composure. A 3-pointer from the other end of the street shot a laser, and he was able to roll away from it. Valkyrie would be proud, he thought to himself, throwing Mjolnir mid-roll. It hit the robot dead center, smashing a hole right through the center of it. 24, he counted to himself. A 1-pointer sprung from one of the buildings to attack him, swinging a blunt rod towards his head. Midoriya jumped back and went to swing back, but before he could the robot was shrunk down before he could catch it. Wah! Huh! He looked up to see a girl with black hair and blue eyes and shrunk the robot. She stepped on it like it was a bug. She looked up at Midoriya and gave him a thumbs up. Oh, thank you, he said, giving her a grin. He turned to find more robots, but shouted back, cool quirk. She nodded, pointing to his hammer. Meanwhile, the teachers were in the observation deck, watching the results live. All Might was practically besides himself. He recognized the green-haired boy, and his name, Midoriya Izuku, seemed so familiar. Practically everyone's eyes were on him in the first place though, for how many points he was racking up. That's the kid you said was the god of thunder. Power Loader let out a whistle. Yeah, he's cutting through these robots like Swiss cheese. He's tearing through these like you did in your entrance exam, Recovery Girl chuckled, nudging All Might. Yeah, he sure is, All Might nodded. Interesting. On the screen, Midoriya turned towards the camera and slammed his hammer to the ground, destroying 5 robots with a burst of lightning. As he looked up, All Might recognized him. The same boy he told couldn't be a hero. It couldn't be. Midoriya hit another robot with a hammer uppercut. He'd lost count, but he had to be in the 40s at this point. Suddenly, he heard a loud scream. No, not a loud scream. That's a collection of screams. That's a ton of people. He turned towards the source to see a stampede of other students charging towards him. It looked like almost every entrant was opposite of the two of them. Midoriya even saw the taller boy with the blue hair and the glasses. As he looked up past the crowd, he saw why. The 0-pointer. The obstacle to be avoided had been unleashed, and it was huge. Towering over every mock building, it clunked the space of about a block in one step. Even Bakugo could be seen using his explosions to rocket away from it, though he diverted off to the side to find more robots to smash up. They said not to fight it. He shuddered, turning to join the others in running. But, help. It wasn't so much just a cry for help, but one that was hurt. Looking past the crowd, he saw a girl pinned under the rubble. She had shoulder-length brown hair, and was struggling to push a large rock off of her, but her arms couldn't reach it. The 0-pointer was coming towards her, as were some smaller robots, and at this rate. Crap, he grunted, all right, here goes. He spun Mjolnir at this side, sending electricity throughout his entire body, charging his muscles. He ran, enhanced strength making his strides carry him further and faster. As 3-pointers began to surround him, he slammed his hammer against the pavement. Bolts of lightning burst forth, exploding the robots around him. Running forward, he whipped Mjolnir at the robot's leg joint. It hit with a crackling burst of lightning, and the leg of robots was knocked backwards, away from anyone. Off balance, the 0-pointer began to lean forward and fall towards Midoriya. He kept running and recalled the hammer. Adrenaline and lightning pushing him forward, Midoriya jumped with all the Asgardian strength granted to him as fitting his position of God of Thunder. Rocketing through the air, he met with the head of Zero-Pointer Stories above the ground. With a heavy swing of Mjolnir, he struck the robot across its metallic face, causing electricity to explode above the testing grounds. Lightning crackled in all directions as the robot went flying backwards, falling apart in pieces on the ground below. Midoriya smiled, and spun the hammer around his head, yelling out a war cry in his victory. In his adrenaline and excitement, he hadn't even realized he was hovering in the air admiring his work. He lowered himself, slowly, realizing what he had just figured out how to fly, and tried to hold on to that feeling. He touched the ground to find that the brunette girl who had been trapped had managed to free herself from the rubble, and his immediate question was, "Are you all right?" The girl looked up at him, panting and tired, but beamed at him all the same. "Am I all right? More than all right. Did you see what you did to that thing? You were amazing. If you hadn't showed up, that thing would have crushed me." Midoriya could feel his face heat up, not used to ever receiving compliments. Oh, it was nothing. I wouldn't call that nothing. You looked like All Might with that level of power." The brunette cheered. Midoriya could feel his level of embarrassment rising, but a siren went off, announcing the exercise was over. "And that's time," Present Mike yelled from a PA system. "The test is over. Please make your way to exit in an orderly fashion. Any injured please remain where you are." I completely forgot the clock was still counting down." The brunette winced. "Crap, I hope I did okay." Without thinking, Midoriya shook his head. "I'm sure you did." The two followed a crowd of students towards the exit. "How did you get out of that rubble anyway? Was it your quirk?" The girl explained her zero-gravity quirk, and its drawback of feeling sick if she used it too much or on things that were too heavy. Midoriya, remembering his earlier interaction with Asui, held back his muttering, chewing on his tongue. "That sounds so cool," he allowed himself to say, finally. "Well, it's not magic electric hammer cool, but thanks." She smiled. "Sorry, I totally forgot. I'm Uraraka Ochako." She held out a hand for a handshake, pinky tucked in. "Midoriya Izuku," he replied, returning the handshake. Knees weak, he hoped his palms weren't sweaty, and that he'd be able to keep down Mom's spaghetti later. He snapped his attention back to the gravity user. Nice to meet you." They left the building, and Midoriya almost bumped into Asui. Hey, Suyu. How did you do?" "Hiro, I think I did okay," she croaked, tapping her chin with her finger. "To be honest, I sort of lost count, Hiro. But I don't think anything compares to what you did to the zero-pointer." Midoriya felt himself turn scarlet again as he rubbed the back of his neck. Come on, I don't. You saw that too, right?" Uraraka exclaimed, excitedly shaking her fists up and down. "That was like the coolest thing ever, right? Hiro, I thought maybe All Might had come to save you, until I saw the green hair." Asui nodded. She looked at Midoriya and tilted her head. "What is your quirk anyway, Hiro?" Midoriya gulped. This was part of his nerves the whole day. "Well, it's not really a quirk, to be honest." He lifted Mjolnir. "I'm the God of Thunder. Like Thor, but the next one. His successor." The two girls fell silent for a moment, only for the silence to be broken by Uraraka giggling. "Come on, there's no way. Thor is like ancient history." He winced, suspecting that this was the sort of reaction. "I'm serious. This is Mjolnir, legendary hammer of Thor, the Avenger and God of Thunder." "Hiro, where did you find it?" Izuku thought, and realized the story wasn't helping his case. "I found it in the woods. It doesn't matter. Look, what if I prove to you only I can lift because I'm worthy?" He sat the hammer down on the sidewalk, drawing some odd looks from Uraraka, Asui, and some passers-by. Uraraka shrugged. "All right, but I warn you, I'm stronger than I look." Sticking a pinky out, she leaned over and tugged on the hammer, which didn't budge at all. "All right, but what if I do this?" She touched Mjolnir's head with all 5 fingers, but the hammer did not float. "Wait, how?" "Hiro, can I try?" Uraraka pouted and stepped aside, allowing Asui to try and lift Mjolnir as well, though it didn't budge in the slightest. She let out a few grunts and shook her head. All right, now watch, Midoriya advised. As they stepped back, he opened his hand and summoned Mjolnir back to him, which flew through the air into his fingers. He flipped it in his hand a few times. See, only those worthy of the mantle of God of Thunder can wield. Uraraka snickered. I'm still not sure I believe you, but maybe you can prove it if we both get into UA. Asui croaked and nodded as well. Midoriya sighed. Fine. I wouldn't believe me either, to be honest. The three parted ways not long after, Midoriya heading back to his mom's car, only to immediately be chastised about who the pretty girls he was talking to were. Midoriya Inko had reservations about this whole God of Thunder business, as just about any mother would. Between her son going on about being the God of Thunder to being forcefully introduced to Thor himself at an evaluation for UA, her whole world view had to change in short order. Part of her was always thankful for Izuku being quirkless. She never wanted to have to worry about her son doing something as dangerous as heroics. Now, with him being thrust into the position of God of Thunder, it seemed almost inevitable. It was about a week after the entrance exam, she was finally able to put her feelings into words. Son. She called out while making dinner. She could hear his footfalls as he made his way to the living room, and he soon popped around the corner. What's up, Mom? Did the entrance results come? She winced. He'd been asking that every day. No, I wanted to talk to you about, well, this whole thing with Thor. Sure, Mom, what about it? He asked, leaning back against the counter. Am I spending too much time training? Well, no, are you sure this is what you want? Inko asked as she checked how much longer was left on the oven timer. What do you mean? Well, you said you just found that hammer in the middle of nowhere. Now, suddenly, you have all these powers that aren't even quirks. And not only that, you'll one day rule over a place you really don't know anything about. Are you happy with this? You can say no. Inko explained. Izuku blinked back at her. To be honest, Mom, I've never really thought about it. But I probably haven't because this is what I've always wanted. This is how I'll get to be a hero, like I always wanted. To save everyone with a smile. To be honest, I can't remember a time before becoming God of Thunder that I've ever been this happy. The words made Inko tear up. Was it that bad? The smile ran away from Izuku's face. I never really told you just how bad it was being quirkless. What do you mean, honey? Inko asked. You might want to sit down, Izuku sighed. I think we should talk about why me and Bakugo aren't friends anymore. Midoriya sat at his desk, breathing shakily. He looked at his new, plain alarm clock. He'd been getting rid of some of his old All Might merchandise after what happened the day of the sludge villain, and confirmed that 20 minutes had gone by since he watched the hollow disc that had been sent to him. His nose itched a little, which was probably what was calling him back to reality. He'd gotten a special message from Principal Nedzu himself. Greetings, Midoriya Izuku. The image of the rodent principal stated, I know the test was something of a formality, but I have to say, I'm most certainly glad you took it. Midoriya felt an anxious smile creep to his face. That was surely a good sign. Not only did you get a top score in villain points at 67, you received the highest score in our hidden parameter, rescue points. We didn't disclose this to the test takers, as we wanted to see how heroic they would be with no ulterior motives. And you scored 90 rescue points, more than anyone in the history of the school. There was never a doubt, but I'm glad to welcome you to your Hero Academia. The recording cut out, leaving the room silent once more. Midoriya leaned back in his chair and covered his face with his hands, letting out a large exhale. With the breath leaving his lungs, it felt like he was expelling weeks' worth of anxiety and what-ifs that had been plaguing him. He placed his hands down, a smile on his face as he stood up from his chair. He flung open the bedroom door to see his mom waiting there. I got in. Inko gasped. You got in. I got in. You got in, young Midoriya. Izuku turned, raising his eyebrows at Thor, who was sitting on their couch in jeans and a hoodie as if he did this every day. I did. When did you get here? Oh, Your mother emailed me when you received the letter from UA, so I came right away. But that's not important, Thor exclaimed. You got in. The Viking god sprung up off the couch and wrapped both Midoriya in a big group hug. We must celebrate this achievement. Well, I could make us something, Inko began, blushing from how close the Norseman was, but Thor was having none of it. Nonsense, he bellowed. Tonight we feast in the halls of Asgard. Wait. Izuku shook his head as Thor set both Midoriya down. You guys email each other. To say Midoriya Inko was floored at the sight of Asgard was probably an understatement. She'd had her reservations about Thor, especially after finding out he was real, but she hadn't even thought about the place Izuku had been going for all this time. Men and women in robes and armor were walking around everywhere, and for every weird look she gave them, she was getting the same in return for her own clothes. Although, a few Asgardian warriors seemed to recognize her son and would high-five him as they passed. Still, she was not one to pass up the hospitality of someone as seemingly generous as Thor. Asgard cuisine was quite different from Japanese fare, and she had to stifle some laughter as the king of Asgard himself took a large bite from a turkey leg barehanded. Izuku was talking to a warrior woman seated near the front. Apparently her name was Valkyrie and she had played an important role in assisting with his training and the goings-on of Asgard. Inko took the time to lean over and ask Thor, so what sort of training have you been giving my son? Thor dropped the turkey leg and grinned lopsidedly. All sorts. One of his earlier tasks was when he paused, seeing the anxious look on the mother's face. He was about to recount the Lich Dragon conquest for his controller, but he realized that Midgardians had forgotten about monsters. Ah, you know what? Maybe it's best he tell you. My training is informal, more aligned with the type of fieldwork he could expect as a hero. My second in command, Valkyrie, yes, her there, she has been helping me teach young Midoriya weapon handling and proper battle form. Valkyrie, who had overheard her name pop up, took a swig of ale from the tankard in front of her, before ruffling Izuku's hair. This bushy-headed kid's become one of my favorite sparring partners. He's got a real warrior's instinct. Izuku blushed and hid behind a leg of lamb. Inko tried not to look too terrified at the amount of information she had just been given. Apparently she had failed, as Thor reached over and grabbed her shoulder. One can't be a hero without putting themselves in danger. But I believe that's part of what makes Midoriya worthy. He'll leap into combat without becoming reckless. His mind is always working out the proper tactics. More than can be said for you, King Thor, Valkyrie snarked, causing some of the warriors to laugh. Izuku himself stifled a laugh, hoping Thor wouldn't catch on. Thor just rolled his eyes. I may be a hothead, but I always got things done, didn't I? I was just thinking that a lot of this seems like gladiator training, not hero training, Inko said quietly, so that just Thor heard. Thor rubbed his beard, pondering the words, before leaning in to speak to just Inko. You know, growing up, those two things were indistinguishable. I took part in many wars on my father Odin's behalf, hailed as a hero for all the bloody battles I won. But when I came to Midgard, Earth, I met a lot of brave men and women who showed me that distinction. Honor, valor, and kindness come with that title, not just feats of strength. Thor grinned at his ward's mother. Your boy has those things. I have no doubt they factor into why Mjolnir chose him. He has the inner strength to be worthy of the title. The only thing missing in him was battle prowess, which is where Valkyrie and I come in. Well, I can't say you haven't done a good job, Inko admitted. It's nice to see him able to stand up for himself. Are you going to be done once he goes to UA? Heavens no, Thor laughed. It had been some time since Inko had heard such a hearty sound. I'll stick around to be the boy's mentor throughout his training. Have to make sure he makes the title look good. I've been in contact with the principal of the place as well, who wants to keep me integrated in his training. He took a swig of ale and puffed out his chest. Something about the school needing help when training a hero outside of standard quirks. Inko chuckled. The more she talked with Thor, the more human he seemed. Well, I'm glad. You've done a good job, and I'm glad you'll keep taking care of my boy. I'm not convinced Izuku doesn't take care of Thor half the time, Valkyrie sniped, drawing another laugh from the table. The end of his tenure at Aldera was approaching rapidly. As the weather warmed to spring, Midoriya, even as a usually diligent student, found himself staring out the window more and more. He looked at every cloud a little differently now. They were all an opportunity. Something he could manipulate into a storm. God of Thunder. I don't feel like a god. Midoriya mused to himself. Maybe I'll call myself Hero of Thunder for a while. Calling myself a god makes me sound like a real glory hound. It looks like we have 2 students in this class who will be entering the Heroics course at UA. Came the voice of the teacher at the end of the day. This ripped Midoriya's attention right back to the front of the class. Oh great. Bakugo Katsuki. A few of the blonde's friends whooped and made other obnoxious noises, and Midoriya Izuku. The class fell silent, making Midoriya squirm. While he certainly wasn't teased anymore, he definitely felt like an outcast at school. People avoided him like the plague, whispers pelting his back as soon as he was behind them. He may go to UA being open about the whole God of Thunder thing, but he certainly wasn't going to advertise it to the middle school that made his life miserable for years. The teacher himself seemed a bit surprised. Well, good job, guys. Once the shock of his abilities had worn off, rumors circled around Midoriya, as was how teens that age were. Some had distrusted Midoriya altogether, claiming he had only pretended to be quirkless for sympathy, a notion that made his blood boil. He'd never been met with sympathy for that condition, and some were convinced that the hammer itself was support gear that he'd stolen, making his abilities a fraud. Midoriya wasn't sure which rumor irritated him more, but he was eager to leave Aldera behind. Perhaps the only positive of the whole thing was that Bakugo at least left him alone for now. Class resumed as normal, but Midoriya still was just itching to get home that day. A dark air of sorts seemed to hang above the class now that their resident rumor mill had achieved his goal of getting into UA. He was the first one out of the door when the bell rang, but no sooner was he outside of the door when Bakugo came up and grabbed his shoulder. We need to talk, nerd. Midoriya tensed up. He hated this feeling. He was so much stronger now than he'd ever been before, but all the muscles in the world didn't seem to stop the PTSD he had whenever Bakugo grabbed his shoulders, and he couldn't stop himself from flinching. He did his best to fight back the anxious, jittery feeling as he turned around. He didn't need to be afraid anymore. He turned around and asked, "What is it, Kachan?" He was impressed by how calm he made himself sound. Bakugo glared at him for a second, before simply uttering the word, "Quit." Izuku blinked. "Quit? Quit what?" "Quit UA. Drop out." Bakugo growled. Like a twig snapping, the nervousness and fear was flooded by frustration and anger. "What? Why would I?" "Because I don't know how you fooled everyone into thinking you have this weird hammer electricity quirk, but you aren't fooling me." Bakugo seethed, grabbing Midoriya by the collar. The familiar smell of smoke wafted into Izuku's nose as Bakugo's palms began to sizzle threateningly. "You're a quirkless Deku, and you always will be." Using something Valkyrie taught him, he thrust his arms between where Bakugo was holding him and thrust them outwards, breaking the blonde's grip on him. With a forceful shove, he pushed Bakugo away, where the taller boy stumbled back a few feet before falling on his ass. "I'm not a Deku, Bakugo." Izuku growled with an intensity he didn't know he had. He thrust a finger out at his former friend and tormentor. "This has been my dream, same as yours, since we were kids. You know that. It's all we used to talk about. So I don't care how many nasty words or explosions you throw at me, I'm not quitting. I'll never quit." He held up his right hand and Mjolnir flew into it. "You better get used to seeing me in this hammer, because I'm going to be the #1 hero. Not you." He turned on his heel and stormed off, not remembering the last time he'd ever felt this mad in his life. Wiping his eyes on his sleeves one last time, Midoriya realized though that he almost felt like a weight had been lifted off his chest. It was an odd feeling, on the first day of UA. Both for his dream to be coming true, and for his mom and Thor to be walking him to the bus stop. Thor's disguise of sunglasses and a hoodie seemed ridiculous to Izuku, but considering no one had seen Thor in centuries, it was also completely unnecessary. Mjolnir in hand, Midoriya turned and smiled at his mother and mentor. "Well, all right guys, I'll see you after class." Inko, of course, could hardly say goodbye between some of the most vicious sobbing Thor had ever seen in his life, so Thor took it upon himself to clap his young ward on the shoulder and give a broad grin. Your first steps toward being a hero, and in the grand scheme, ruler of Asgard. Try not to blow them all away too hard, my boy. Izuku gave a laugh before hugging his mother. Thanks. As the teen boarded the bus into the city, Thor found himself having to hold back waterworks as well as pride swelled up in his chest. Excuse me, sir. Thor turned to see a tall, blonde, and lanky individual approaching him. Yes. You seem like a strong guy, could you help me load something into my truck? It will only take a second, I promise. The taller man asked. Thor looked at Inko, who was still a sobbing mess of emotions as her son's bus pulled away. I'll be right back, all right. Perhaps some tea shall do us some good, he suggested. Inko merely nodded, pulling a handkerchief from her pocket as she turned back towards the apartment. Thor followed the blonde man a few buildings down the block, where a large box was waiting outside the back of a truck. Thor easily squat down and lifted the box, wondering what was possibly inside. I've got one more inside, if you would help me, the taller man added. If that's the last of it, sure, Thor nodded, following the merely skeletal man inside the building. Once inside, however, the skinny man turned and looked at Thor with a grimace. Puffing out his chest, he became muscular once more, revealing none other than All Might, face to face with the God of Thunder. Hello again, Thor, the voice of All Might boomed. Thor's face immediately turned into a scowl. So it was you. Have the years been so unkind to you, Toshinori, or is that simply a disguise? All Might went to answer, but Thor was shocked that instead of words, a violent, bloody cough escaped his mouth. Thor stepped back in reflex, and All Might was quickly reverted back to his bony, skeletal form. Are you okay? The king of Asgard asked. Why yes, sorry, All Might wiped his mouth with a rag he kept on him. Not a disguise, I'm afraid. I'm a few years out from a bad injury. He lifted his shirt to show Thor the wound he'd received all those years ago. I'm afraid I'm on limited time as far as heroics go. Thor clicked his tongue. Well, while I know we don't see eye to eye on all matters, I'm sorry to see what has happened to you. Time comes for us all in the end, though the sands in our hourglasses all flow at different rates. That they do. That's why I wanted to talk to you, All Might said, pocketing his cough rag. I see you've found a successor. Have I? Well, it wasn't hard to figure out when a kid with your weapon showed up to the UA entrance exam and used your power set. All Might scoffed. We don't need to pretend. All right, so young Midoriya was chosen by Mjolnir to be my successor. What of it? Thor asked. It's a small world. I had an encounter with him last year. He'd asked me. He asked you if someone without what you Midgardians called quirks could be a hero, and you crushed his spirit. Yes, I'm aware of the story, Thor replied, curtly. Why, it was that same day he found Mjolnir between worlds and claimed the power of the God of Thunder. Fate has a funny way of playing its hand. All Might's smile faltered. So, that's how it happened. I see. I'm glad he was able to find a way to achieve his dreams, then. Still, part of me was afraid you had made that choice on purpose, given our history. Mjolnir makes the choice, not me, Thor scoffed back. You know this. After all, it chose you not so long ago. All Might let out a long sigh and turned away from Thor. It did, and you know how I felt about mixing one for all with the power of the God of Thunder. And it appears that the choice to reject the power is biting you. Mjolnir could heal those wounds of yours, you know, Thor pointed out. I stand by my choice, All Might retorted. It's too much power for one person. If One for All were to ever fall into the wrong hands, I'd like to know there's something out there powerful enough to stop it. Well, I never disagreed with that, did I? Thor replied. More of how you dismissed me. What of it? Why call me out here? Well, like I said, I wanted to see if Midoriya being your successor was your doing or some sort of divine prank, though that got answered, All Might sighed. But other than that, does he know that we're familiar with each other? He does not, Thor answered, earnestly. It had not come up. I'm not going to hide that information from him, Thor. I'm sure it will if I'm going to be teaching him. We can discuss that with Midoriya when the time is right, Thor replied. Speaking of, I suppose you'll need to find a successor in your own right, won't you? All Might returned the question with grimace. You aren't wrong. I'm hoping to find one at UA. Speaking of which, I should be going, but I'm sure we'll be speaking again soon if I'm teaching your successor, God of Thunder. Midoriya is God of Thunder now, Thor replied. And I suppose you're right. Thor grabbed the box All Might had left in that room with ease, and walked with the symbol of peace out to his truck. All Might got in the truck without a word and drove off towards UA as Thor watched the vehicle disappear amongst the sea of traffic on the busy street. The king of Asgard scoffed once it was finally out of sight, and walked back towards Midoriya's apartment. Something about All Might's presence seemed foreboding to him. He had a vague awareness from their old meetings that All Might's quirk seemed to attract trouble. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.